this is Jennifer Pionk with A Crocheted Simplicity, and in this video tutorial I'm going to teach you how to crochet the Knit Look Garter stitch. As you'll see, if I can zoom in just a little, you'll see that the stitches resemble the garter stitch in knitting. Now since I can't knit, I've always been on the lookout for stitches that can achieve a similar result in crochet. So I just want to share with you today how I achieve the garter stitch and give you a couple of tips and tricks of my own to help make it more pleasant. Sometimes when you're first beginning to work slip stitch crochet, it can be a little frustrating because it is a special technique and you have to get used to it just like any other crochet technique. But once you find your groove, I assure you it's a lot of fun to work. One of my most favorite stitches is actually the slip stitch. There's so many different things you can do with it. So here I've made a washcloth. So if you'd like to make a washcloth, go ahead and chain 24 or 25 or whatever size you'd like to make, depending on the yarn you're using. I used a 5mm crochet hook to make mine, and I chained 24, so there's 23 stitches. Okay, in the video I'm just going to show you on a small swatch, just to save a little bit of time, but I'll put written instructions on my blog for you to follow along if you'd like to complete a washcloth. This way you have a usable project and not just a small swatch that you're going to toss or frog. You'll have something you can actually use in the kitchen. So this is the back side of the crochet Knit Look Garter stitch. So it still has a pretty cool texture and a nice neat look to it, and a little bit of ribbing. So one thing I love about slip stitch crochet is the fact that it's so stretchy. So it's great to use for cuffs, for bands on the hat, even for coffee sleeves because it fits them nice and snugly. Okay, so let's begin. You need to choose a crochet hook. Like I said, I'm going to be using a 5mm crochet hook, and I have a worsted weight cotton yarn. Now, if it's your first time working with slip stitch crochet, I suggest a couple of stitch markers, and I'll show you how to use those in just a moment. So one of my first tips to begin is when you work slip stitch crochet, do not pull directly from the ball or the skein of yarn that you're working with. Have a pool of yarn laying next to you or on your lap or somewhere where you can easily pull. You don't want to pull directly from the ball or the skein because doing so can cause your tension to be tighter in slip stitch. And with slip stitch crochet, you really need a looser tension. So go ahead and begin with a slip knot on your hook. And I'm going to just chain 12 just to make a small swatch. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. This will just give me a big enough swatch to work with and show you guys. Now, just like any other stitches, so we have our chain, and you see that they form a V. In the top of a single crochet and a double crochet, all the stitches form a V when you look at the top of the stitches. The same thing's going to happen with slip stitch crochet. The only thing that's different is that it's a shorter stitch. It's not as tall as the other ones, but you're going to work it the exact same. So when you're working, you want to make sure that your slip stitches are the same size, the same width as the stitches from the previous row. So to begin, we're going to work in the back hump of our foundation chain. We're going to slip stitch into the second chain from our hook. So you insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, and continue to pull it right through the loop on your hook. Now, after you pull through, don't pause and then pull through. Sometimes that can create tension issues as well. So really try to do it in one swooping motion. Insert your hook into the back hump of the chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull it through the loop on your hook. Now when you're working slip stitch crochet stitches, you use a little bit looser tension than you normally use when you crochet a single crochet or a double crochet. Okay, so insert your hook into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull it right through the loop on your hook. Now, the other thing I do not do is I do not wrap the yarn around my fingers while working slip stitch crochet because that will also tighten my tension. It'll cause my stitches to be tighter, and eventually my work is going to cinch in or shorten on the sides. And you want to make sure, like I said, you want to make sure that your slip stitches are consistent and the same size as the stitches from the previous row. just like all of their stitches. If you were to begin your swatch with single crochet and you gradually increased your tension, your work would end up being shorter. Same thing with slip stitch. It's no different. It's just a shorter stitch. So you want to make sure that your stitches are the same size as the stitches you're working into. This takes a little bit of getting used to, and to loosen up your tension and get, it takes a little practice. But I promise you, once you find your own groove, it really is a lot of fun. So note that the slip stitches on the top have the V, just like all of your other stitches do. Okay. Now, some people choose not to do a turning chain. I always do. There is no right or wrong way here. You can or you don't have. You don't have to. But one thing you do is after you do your turning chain, tighten it up a little bit to make sure that it's not sloppy on your edges if you're not going to have a finished edge. Okay, so I'm going to turn. Now, I'm going to use stitch markers. I've been doing this a long time and I don't use them anymore, but I'm going to show you when you work the first stitch for slip stitch crochet, after you work the first stitch, place a stitch marker in it. That way when you're working back across that next row, you'll know which one to work into. Let me show you that really quick. And then it also may help to place a stitch marker into that last stitch that you work. So we're going to work a slip stitch here, place a stitch marker, and this can be a little tedious at first, but until you get used to seeing where that first and the last stitch is, it's always a good idea. Otherwise you could end up missing stitches. Now if you have to turn your work sideways a little bit to get that swooping motion down, go right ahead. No right or wrong ways to hold your work when doing this. Okay, I've worked that last stitch. I'm going to place a stitch marker in that last stitch before I work my turning chain. Now when I turn, I'll be able to see for sure. I'm going to chain one and turn. I'll be able to see for sure where that first stitch is, because when you look, sometimes you can confuse it with either your turning chain, or sometimes it looks like you need to work into that second stitch and then you lose a stitch. So now that we've got the turning down, to work the garter stitch, here is where we work a knitlet garter stitch. We're going to work in the back loop only, and we're going to slip stitch across. So I'm going to remove my stitch marker, working in the back loop only. You see the top V's, so find the back loop and slip stitch in each stitch across, making sure to keep your slip stitches the same size as the slip stitches from the previous row. And some people have to keep them just a little looser. You'll find your groove. I promise you, if you just keep at it, you will find your groove. And then here we have a stitch marker in our last stitch. So this tells me that this is the last stitch of the row that I need to work into. I'm going to work one more slip stitch. There I have 12 stitches. Okay, I'm going to chain one and turn. And now the second part of the knitlet garter stitch is you work in the front loops only. So now we're going to locate the top V of your stitch and that front loop. We're going to work in the front loop only. So insert your hook from front to back in that front loop, yarn over, and pull it all the way through that loop on your hook. One swooping motion. And still make sure that you keep your tension a little looser so you don't tighten your stitches. Now if you feel your yarn creeping in on you, like I'm feeling right now, my pile of yarn starting to scoot across the table, go ahead and grab it and shake it, loosen it back up. Separate those strands. One swooping motion. Let me see if I can get my hands out of the way. So insert your hook. So here is the back loop, here's the front loop. Insert our hook from front to back, or bottom to top. Yarn over, pull through, and pull through the loop on your hook. Trying to look at the camera at the same time I'm crocheting. It's not the easiest thing to do. Okay, now you really can't notice the garter stitch too much just yet. It becomes real apparent when we work our next row of slip stitches. So go ahead and chain one and turn. And what I meant by tightening up that turning chain is once you get to the end, so before you chain one, tug slightly on the loop on your hook to tighten that loop up, then work your turning chain. That way your turning chain isn't really big and sloppy. Okay, now we're going to work in the back loops only again. So locate that top V of your stitches. And we know that here's the back loop. So we're going to back loop, we're going to slip stitch across in the back loops. And that's all this knit look garter stitch is slip stitching, alternating between the back loops in one row and the front loops of the next row. Okay, so I've gotten to the end of my row. I'm going to tighten up this loop on my hook a little bit to make sure my turning chain isn't sloppy. And then I turn. Now you can see that the garter stitch is starting to pop out a little bit more. It's pretty cool. I need to untangle my yarn just a second. I wasn't very careful when I put it in a pile next to me, and now I'm going to pay the price for it. So, fluffing isn't helping. Okay, I will be right back. Okay, sorry about that. Of course, once I turned the camera off, then it came right out and there wasn't a knot at all. Sometimes that happens. So now we are on a row where we're going to work into the front loops only. So insert your hook from front to back. After we locate the top V's, turn over, pull up a loop, and pull it through that loop on your hook. Okay, so we just slip stitch across, working in the front loop only. Now another big reason that you want to make sure your stitches are loose enough and make sure that the size is the same size as the row before is not only because your work is going to be affected and your gauge will be affected, but also because when you go to work that next row in slip stitch crochet, it's going to be a bugger to get that hook back in that loop if it's too tight. So that's going to be one of your first clues when you're working, is if you have a hard time getting your hook into the next row's stitches, that means your stitches are too tight. You need to loosen them up because you shouldn't have a problem getting a loop in your hook. The hook in the loop, sorry. Okay, so we made it to the end of the row. I'm going to tighten up that loop on my hook, yarn over, chain one. And now we're on the side where we work in the back loops only. And we're going to slip stitch across. Oops. Okay, worked across. I'm going to tighten up that loop on my hook and work my turning chain. Now you can see the garter stitch, it's pretty clear now. So that's all you do, is you repeat one row you work in the back loops only, and the next row you work in the front loops only, and you slip stitch in each stitch across. The last thing I want to mention is when you are working with slip stitch crochet, you can have a nice neat edge. Let me show you my swatch. Make sure that you always turn the same direction. It doesn't matter which way you turn your work when you turn, but make sure you always turn the same direction. That way your edge will be uniform. It will always be the same. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you make yourself a new dishcloth. This is where mine's going in the kitchen. And if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to ask. You can use the contact form on my blog. You can leave a comment on my blog post. You can leave a comment on this video. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. Thanks for watching and have a great day.